Now, I'm really excited to introduce the speakers for this next chat. First up, we have Dr. Joan Fallon, who is the founder and CEO of Curemark. Dr. Fallon is considered a visionary scientist who has dedicated her life's work to championing the health and well-being of children worldwide. Curemark is a biopharmaceutical company focused on the development of novel therapies to treat serious diseases for which there are limited treatment options. The company's pipeline includes a phase 3 clinical stage research program for autism, as well as programs focused on Parkinson's disease, schizophrenia, and addiction. Dr. Fallon holds over 300 patents worldwide, has written numerous scholarly articles, and lectured extensively across the globe on pediatric developmental problems. She is a former assistant professor at Yeshiva University in the Department of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, and she served on the ADA Board of Advisors for the building of the new Yankee Stadium, in addition to testifying before Congress on the matters of business and patents. I'm so sorry, y'all. I don't know why that word's giving me trouble today. Dr. Fallon is the recipient of numerous awards, including being named one of the top 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs of 2020 by Goldman Sachs. So welcome, Dr. Fallon. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Fallon is going to be joined in conversation with our own amazing Leslie Carsons. Leslie recently joined the Power to Fly sales team, having spent the last 15 years selling geeky products to people wearing pocket protectors, where she learned that sliding a pizza under the door is the best way to get meetings. She hails from sunny Southern California, but now resides in drizzly Portland, Oregon, where she has worked tirelessly to convince Oregonians that heels are superior to Birkenstocks. I might be willing to fight you on that, Leslie. She lives with her 2 teenage offspring and enjoys poetry and weightlifting, though not at the same time. So welcome to Leslie and Dr. Fallon. I cannot wait to hear this conversation. I will turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Meg. I'm so excited to be here. And Dr. Fallon, thank you. We're just so thrilled that you made the time to join us today and talk with the Power to Fly community.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and please call me Joan.
Joan, okay, thank you. I was going to ask that question.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get this kicked off by asking about, what brought you to where you're at today, to founding Curemark?
So I was in a clinical practice for 25 years. And in the last sort of stage of that, there seemed to be this very high uptick in children with autism. At first, this large number of children presented with symptoms that really weren't seen very much before, like lack of eye contact, very delayed speech, et cetera. Turned out to be this autism sort of, people call it epidemic, they've called lots of things, but a very high uptick in autism. And, children with autism are very different from one another. So, the old moniker, you see one child with autism, you've seen one child with autism, it's true. And there's a matrix of symptoms and behaviors that sort of make up that diagnosis. But what I noticed in part of what I was looking at was there was something that was more similar child to child, and it was what they ate. So what they ate was more similar child to child, unlike anything I had seen before. And so when you're in pediatrics and you're seeing all these children, you see patterns, but I had not seen this one before. And it was just, parents called it a white diet, a tan diet. But what it was very high carbohydrates and virtually no protein. And that got my curiosity. And when I asked people who were, deep in the field, they said, oh, it's a sensory thing. They don't like the texture of protein on their tongue. And I'm thinking to myself, all these other sensory issues are different child to child. Why would this one be the same? So then I started doing blood analysis and urine and stool analysis on these kids to see if there's anything that they had in common. And it turned out that the first 9 children I did had this low level of an enzyme that digests protein. And that's what started all of this.
Interesting.
And I saw that observation. My brother, who was an inventor very young, said to me, I think you should patent that whole thing, because if you want these children to get help, it needs to have a commercial value. You need to put this out there in a way that people will understand it and that we use it. So I ultimately left practice and started a company.
Wow.
I started a company with 1,500 lab tests confirming what I had found, and 3 patents. And so I started in that way. And that was 2007. We've been through clinical trials and hope to submit our new application for approval early next year.
Oh my gosh, that is so exciting. And, talk about something the world really needs right now. Wow.
Yeah, it's a global problem. It's way, way more numbers than when I started this.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of double click on the products you're talking about. So is it at this point, it sounds like just one product, or do you have some other things that you are hoping to bring out after that? Like, where else does the company go?
So it's a platform technology, right? It's an enzyme replacement type technology. That's tailored for each issue, but in each of these issues, there's a protein issue involved. And so I have over 300 patents globally around the technology and an understanding of that. So the drugs will be different from one another, but we hope to go to start clinical trials later this year or very early next year in schizophrenia and in Parkinson's.
Okay, that's fascinating. And I'd love to hear more about just your take for a non-scientific audience on that gut-brain connection.
So it's only really just starting to be explored now.
Yeah.
And so I think that people have pushed it away. Traditional science has pushed it away for a long time. But now with the microbiome and the understanding of that and what we're doing, I think people are much more embracing of the fact that there is a gut-brain connection. We will probably be the first gut-brain connection drug ever approved.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
The initial mechanism of action is in the gut and then it translates to the brain. So I think that it's going to be an area of discovery that goes well beyond what we're doing, or even well beyond the microbiome, where there are things that actually occur and take place, in that area. So, for example, while COVID affects the lungs and we have all of those issues, there's a tremendous amount of GI involvement in COVID.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that. This is the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah, and in Europe, they do wastewater testing to determine where the outbreaks are going to be. Ah, okay. So it's pretty well known. If you're looking at that, then you know that that's it. And the receptors for that particular virus are in the gut. They're in different parts of the body. But the lungs have a large number, but also the small intestine have a very high number of receptors. So there's way more involvement in the GI tract for a lot of things. That's just one of them. And indeed, some people only have GI symptoms. And you can test a GI tract for COVID. And sometimes it appears there before it appears in the pharynx when you do the swabs. Okay. Which is why they do the wastewater testing. The wastewater testing is a really big, some colleges did it and were able to shut down dorms when they saw that it was starting to increase in the wastewater before symptoms showed up, before an outbreak happened. Wow. There's a lot of gut-brain things I think we're gonna look at in time.
And so now the platform that Curemark is developing, you mentioned that it will help, of course, with autism. You mentioned Parkinson's. What are the other range of diseases you think this gut-brain connection, or at least the platform as you're building it, could potentially influence? And it might be hard to answer, but Well,
I think there are a couple of places. I think, for example, eclampsia in pregnancy. So women, suffer from eclampsia, and it can be catastrophic, right? Where their organs start to shut down, et cetera. There's no one really knows why there's eclampsia and preeclampsia. We know that you start to spill protein in your urine, and you also have, high blood pressure. So there are there are symptoms that we know, but why we don't know. And I believe that there's a protein issue there as well. And we have some patent coverage for that, et cetera. So
That's fascinating.
yeah. And what's interesting is that we are an enzyme, right? So the enzyme doesn't go into the bloodstream. So it by definition, an enzyme is a part of a reaction that takes place, and it's not consumed by the reaction. So it's utilized and then it's gone, expelled. So in this case, the enzyme is taken orally and then it gets expelled by the system ultimately. And so it's not like it's absorbed to the bloodstream and can be dangerous in these areas. It allows great safety in our trials.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I'm curious, I'd love to kind of zoom out a little bit. What are the other disruptive companies that you're seeing in this space targeting, autism or other, neurodiverse issues?
So there's not a lot going on in autism. I mean, there's some things that are very early. Some of the more traditional pharma companies have tried to target a receptor with a drug that hasn't seemed to work. There's a lot of work going on in looking for a gene, but there doesn't seem to be one gene that causes autism. It seems to be a confluence of them. So there's a lot of issues. And again, I think once we get an approval, it will spur other people on to look for more. So there's not a lot going on in the space that's later stage.
Yeah. And there's a question from the audience, which I actually think it dovetails nicely with what you're saying right now, which is, as it relates to this new development, do you hope to be surprised by all the uses and applications for it? Or do you think rather it's going to be more of a sales effort to get the medical industry to embrace it and try it?
No, I think that the efficacy we saw plus the safety will be its own catalyst for use. And so, for example, we have a indication for ADHD, hyperactivity, individuals with autism, although their hyperactivity is a little different, we're able to reduce hyperactivity in those individuals. So,
Wow.
but there are now more non-stimulant drugs out there for ADHD. And those are very large trials, which, we're not really ready to do right now and put all of our attention to that, but we have multiple indications.
Wow, that's fascinating. And then where do you see, and I realize this is going to be very speculative, but where do you see things, say, 1 to 5 years from now? Maybe in the ideal world, if it goes, if it's as successful as it looks like it will be.
So I never went into biotech to think about, sort of having a company making money. That wasn't what spurred me on to do this.
Yeah.
It was, I had something and maybe it can help children.
Yeah.
So my goal is to get it to children everywhere. So I want to make sure that everyone who needs this gets it, whether they can technically pay for it or not. I think that every child needs to get this drug. Who needs it? And so that will be sort of the focus for me going forward, is to make sure that, it's everywhere. I was a couple of summers ago with the Nigerian health minister, and someone said, "Oh, she's doing autism." I said, "Do you have a lot of autism there?" He goes, "Are you kidding me? Of course we do." So there's a lot of autism everywhere. China, it's about the same now as it is here.
Wow. I was just gonna ask if we see a higher incidence in the US, or if it's and then maybe it kind of less elsewhere.
So the highest incidence, I believe that the most recent study shows the highest incidence is in Qatar, in the Middle East. And I was there just before the pandemic came. Actually, it started to come there when I was there March 1 year ago. And they are very aggressive in doing whatever they can do to look at the children and help them. Their schools, their behavioral therapies. South Korea has a high incidence. I think that I've traveled the globe looking at, places where they treat the children, How do they do what they do? And so there's a need for this. And so I think that being able to get it to them will be an important part of what I do going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I have I have an update that says you have a book coming out in the fall, which I'd love to hear about.
Yes, so I do. It's called Goodbye Status Quo, Reimagining the Landscape of Innovation. And it's a compilation of sort of vignettes of things that I've experienced throughout this process, things I've learned about myself, and things that people can apply to their lives, whether that's in an entrepreneurial way or in their office setting, things where change is really important. And lots of people are fearful of change. And so the book is sort of divided into 3 sections, which is, the landscape of change, the impediments to change, and then how do you effectuate change?
Yeah. Well, I am an Audible junkie, so hopefully it will be on Audible soon.
I'm sure it will be.
Because then I can consume it, just
Yes.
being purely selfish. So what would your advice be to parents? If I assume we've got some number of people in the audience with kids who have autism.
Right. Don't give up on them. I think it's a very hard road because you've got children without treatment, right? There's no standard of care for this condition.
Yeah.
And so parents are very hopeful, but I think giving up if you cannot give up, don't give up. Just keep fighting for your child, advocating constantly for the right environment, for their education, for the right environment at home, whatever you can do. It's hard because 50% of incomes are lost in families that have an autistic child. There's all this uncertainty, there's mental health issues, there's all kinds of things, because in some cases it's the same thing over and over again. That's what change is very hard for those children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
and it's hard, it's hard on the siblings too, even if they're neurotypical.
Right.
Yeah.
And some parents blame themselves. It's not about, you can't blame yourself. This is not about you causing autism. It's about the condition being there.
Yeah. We have some questions from the audience.
Okay.
Someone is asking about, what about adults with who are on the spectrum?
So we didn't test what we have on adults, so I can't really answer that. But I suspect that we will do trials on older, on adults. We have a extension study that we've done, so the kids kind of have started sort of somewhere in that 3 to 8 range. Some of them are now like 17. They've been on this for a long time.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. And so, so we see changes in them as well. So we hope that maybe there's something that we can do for adults, but I'm not certain of where we are with that.
That's fair. That's fair. And I thought it was interesting when you said you've had kids who've been on it for, it sounds like maybe close to a decade. Is that a normal length of a clinical trial? Yeah.
No. Yeah. No, it's not at all. FDA just kind of looks at us, and because the generally the conditions of a clinical trial are too stringent for people to follow. Like you have to come back X amount of time, like every 3 months or every 2 months or whatever it is at the time. But we had a child, for example, that came from the Netherlands who had very severe autism. So the only way they could get into the trial was to come and literally establish residency in the US.
Wow.
And stay here for that period of time before and after the actual double-blind clinical trial. And then when it became a stretched out time where they didn't have to come back every 2 weeks or something, they would go back to the Netherlands and then fly back every month or every 3 months. We had to get them a visa, help them apply for that. But the changes were, for them, very profound. Now, it's the kind of thing where if a child starts here, they end up here. If they start here, they end up here, right? So this child had very severe autism, profound autism. He didn't respond to any kind of verbal commands. He had no eye contact, no touching. And he would run out of the house. So they had to put locks way up on the top of the doors in order to keep him from running. And he was nonverbal. And for him, he was still nonverbal, but he responded to commands. So he wasn't going to dart out in the street, right? And he would hug his parents. And he did things, he could go out to dinner with them. Those are big things for a family, right? So they would fly from the Netherlands, during those periods of time. So it was very, parents are motivated. Something is working, they're motivated to keep them in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would be. There's another question about, it's kind of a two-part question about whether you have any personal or close experience with someone who is autistic. That's the first part of the question.
Okay. So the answer is no, I do not. I just saw these children in my practice.
Day in, day out.
Some of them still, some of them reach out to me still. Kids that I diagnosed when they were, toddlers. But I didn't have anyone in my family or specific to autism. So I was motivated by the need for children to have something to help them.
Yeah, a massively growing number of children. The other question is, do you think having a personal connection to an issue like this makes it better or worse for a medical researcher?
So that's a really, really good question, okay? Because in some ways, it's very advantageous. And I look at that two ways. One is that there's a tremendous motivation. And the other is that you have some insights into the disease, whatever that is. Okay. On the other hand, right, those insights may cloud your judgment.
Yeah.
It could be helpful, but they could also cloud the direction of your research.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying what you find, but just the direction of it. So I think that it's both good and not. But I do think that the things that you see, like when these parents came to me and said, my child eats a white diet or a tan diet, their physicians weren't saying that to me. The parents were saying that to me because they saw the patterns. And I think it's very important to listen to that because it's very much present. That's a great question. Whoever asked that question.
Yeah, I like that one too. And what would your advice be to, the Power to Fly community or people who care about this issue? Are there things we can do to, somehow double click or add emphasis to, whoever the governing bodies are, or, like help people understand, like, we think this is worth additional research and science funding?
I think one of the things that tech can do is become a major employer of these individuals who can be employed. So I do a lot of lecturing to companies about the talents that these individuals have. So individuals with autism have talents, really important talents. And so like, for example, UBS out of Tennessee, out of Nashville, they're like whole cybersecurity department are individuals with autism.
Get out of here.
No, because they can see patterns in check writing. They can find mistakes in code. SAP is a huge employer, EY. So, finding the talent and then applying them in terms of employment is really something that tech could really do more than it does. And I think there's probably a significant number of people on the spectrum in tech already.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm talking about some of the more severe individuals whose talents are going to waste.
Yeah. And how, like if you were a tech employer and you wanted to learn more about, like, okay, what are the talents? What is the best way to employ people on the spectrum? Like, is there someplace you can go to learn about it?
Yeah, there are a couple. So I would look at the SAP website as well as EY, because they're very heavily into employing individuals on the spectrum. There are a couple of other groups. I'll have to get you the one called the Precisionists, and they are a group that helps prepare individuals on the spectrum to the workplace and matches them. So that's one group that does that. So there are a lot of groups that actually match tech companies with individuals with autism.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Okay. Anything else you think the audience should know that I didn't ask about?
I just think that, when I started this, I took a huge risk, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And I think risk sometimes keeps people from doing things they want to do. And I think that if you are willing to manage that risk and understand what that's about, then you could probably do anything you want to do if you understand it and manage it. But I think I said before, both my brother and I have been entrepreneurs at different parts of our lives. Him much earlier, I'm much later. And people said, well, how is it that the two of you could do that? And I didn't ever think about the question, but both my parents were underwriters. My mother was an actuary. So they learned that risk is just something you manage. It's not something to be afraid of. It's just everything's insurable. Like there was all of that kind of thing. So I think that understanding your environment and what the risks are, I think is important, but not to be afraid of them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, this has been so fascinating, and I will be checking out your book, which, like I said, I hope is on Audible soon. Put a plug there.
It's coming out late October, so hopefully it'll be there. Yes.
Okay, I'll make a note to myself.
Thank you.
I'm going to check out the SAP and EY websites.
Great.
Thank you so much. This was
Thank you so
fascinating.
much. It's an honor.
Thanks for the work you do in the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to both of you ladies. That was an absolutely amazing conversation. I'm so happy I got to sit in on it. And I can't wait to read your book. So thank you so much for letting us know about that.
Thank you. Bye-bye.